My friends, healing rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or applause. It moves quietly, like dawn seeping through a darkened room. You don't notice it at first. You just wake up one morning and realize the heaviness you carried doesn't feel as heavy anymore. Carl Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." He believed that every moment of suffering carries a hidden invitation, a chance to confront what's been buried within us. But this process isn't glamorous. It's not the glossy version of healing that the world loves to sell. It's raw, slow, and often invisible. We live in a culture that measures progress by what can be seen: smiles, productivity, optimism. But the soul doesn't heal in public. It heals in silence, in the pauses between breakdowns, in the nights when you choose rest over self-blame. Healing is not the absence of pain. It's the transformation of the moment pain stops being an enemy and becomes a teacher. Maybe you think you're still broken because the light isn't blinding yet. But sometimes healing begins the instant you stop trying to go back to who you were before the pain and start allowing yourself to become who you were meant to be after it. The truth is, your growth may not look dramatic. It may not feel like progress. But within that quiet persistence lies something profound, what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole, of integrating the parts of yourself that once felt lost, rejected, or unseen. And that's where we begin, by recognizing the subtle signs that your soul has already started to heal. Not the loud healing that everyone notices, but the kind only you can feel. Let's begin with the first sign. Healing often begins in places where we once begged for answers. There was a time when your mind replayed the same moments over and over, searching for logic in heartbreak, for explanation in silence. You wanted to understand why they left, why life changed, why the story ended the way it did. You believed that if someone could just explain it, maybe the pain would loosen its grip. But one day, without even realizing it, you stopped chasing that closure. You stopped refreshing the conversation in your head, stopped writing letters you'd never send, stopped wondering how they remember you. You accepted that not every story gets a clear ending. And somehow, that acceptance felt lighter than any answer could. Jung believed that the people we meet act as mirrors for our own psyche. They show us the parts of ourselves we've neglected or refused to see. When those people disappear, they often take pieces of our identity with them, but they also leave behind lessons that were meant to awaken us. The truth is, closure doesn't come from others. It's an internal decision to stop bleeding for what no longer exists. Sometimes the mind still wants to know. It craves understanding because confusion feels like chaos. But the soul knows that peace isn't found in explanations. It's found in release. Closure is not a moment. It's a shift. It happens quietly. The first time you stop checking the door, hoping they might return. The first time you walk away without resentment. The first time you feel gratitude instead of bitterness. From a psychological lens, this is the point where the conscious mind and the unconscious begin to reconcile. What once felt like rejection now feels like redirection. You begin to see that endings aren't punishments. They're boundaries life creates for your growth. You've healed more than you realize when you can say, "I don't need to know why anymore." Because that's the moment your energy stops circling the past and starts moving toward your becoming. And from that quiet peace grows something even deeper. The realization that you no longer need to be understood to feel whole. There was a time when being misunderstood cut deeply. You wanted so badly for others to see your intentions, to recognize your heart, to say, "I understand you." You explained yourself endlessly, trying to prove you were good, reasonable, worthy. But healing teaches a quieter truth. Not everyone is meant to understand you. And they don't have to. Carl Jung often spoke about projection, how people see in others what they refuse to face within themselves. When someone mocks your sensitivity, it's often because they've buried their own. When they dismiss your depth, it's because they're afraid of what's beneath their own surface. Most people don't actually see you. They see their reflection, filtered through their wounds. Once you understand this, something inside you softens. You stop arguing with perception. You stop trying to explain your soul to people committed to misunderstanding it. This isn't arrogance, it's emotional maturity. You begin to realize that your peace is worth more than being right. Psychologists describe this as a shift from external validation to internal coherence. You no longer need approval to feel aligned with yourself. You start trusting your inner compass instead of chasing affirmation. That's what Jung meant by individuation, the process of becoming whole within your own being, no longer fragmented by the expectations of others. And slowly, the need to defend yourself fades. You can listen to someone misjudge your story, even your character, and still stay calm. Because now, you know your truth doesn't become less true when others can't see it. You've healed more than you realize when misunderstanding no longer threatens your peace. When your self-worth no longer trembles at someone's disapproval. When you can smile gently at false assumptions, knowing they say more about the observer than about you. That's the quiet confidence of a person who's made peace with their shadow. The part of the psyche that no longer seeks to be seen, only to be integrated. And once you stop needing to be understood, another layer of healing unfolds. You begin to stop romanticizing what once was and start seeing your past for what it truly taught you. At some point in healing, memory begins to lose its sharp edges. The songs that once hurt start to sound different. The places that once haunted you feel strangely quiet. It's not that you've forgotten, it's that you've stopped romanticizing what broke you. You used to live inside old stories, replaying them like sacred scripts. You wondered if you could have changed the ending. Is one more conversation, one different choice, might have saved everything. But that's what nostalgia does. It paints pain in softer colors, turning chaos into something almost beautiful. Healing begins when you stop worshiping what wounded you. When you can look back and see not what was lost, but what was revealed. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The past you once idealized was not fate, it was a mirror. Every relationship, every disappointment, every silence was trying to show you something about yourself. When you revisit the past through the lens of awareness, you start to see how every wound carried a message. That's the gift of integration. You no longer want to return to what once was because you understand that version of you needed those lessons. You see how certain people mirrored your insecurities, how familiar patterns repeated until you were forced to grow beyond them. Psychologists call this cognitive reappraisal, the ability to reinterpret memories without emotional distortion. It's not denial, it's evolution. The story hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has. You no longer crave the comfort of what once hurt you. You stop calling it the good old days because you remember the tears that came between those moments. You no longer miss the chaos that once felt like love. This shift is one of the clearest indicators of deep healing. The past no longer defines you, it informs you. You can revisit it without drowning in it. You can remember without yearning. You no longer ask, "Why did it happen?" You ask, "What did it teach me?" And when nostalgia stops hurting, that's when you know you've crossed an invisible threshold. The unconscious has done its work. You've awakened. And from that awakening comes a new kind of peace. The kind that appears when solitude stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like home. There comes a point in healing when the silence that once terrified you becomes sacred. You sit in your room alone, and for the first time, it doesn't feel like abandonment. It feels like arrival. You've stopped running from your thoughts because they no longer feel like enemies. That's one of the surest signs of deep transformation. When solitude no longer feels lonely. Jung believed that wholeness doesn't come from rejecting our shadows, but from embracing them. The shadow, he said, is not evil. It's simply the part of us that has not yet been made conscious. When you stop filling the silence with distraction and start listening to the parts of yourself you used to avoid, you begin to integrate them. You sit with the anger without fearing it. You face the sadness without labeling it as weakness. You start to understand that every emotion carries intelligence, each one pointing you toward what still needs care. This is where healing turns into wisdom, and soon your reactions begin to change too. You no longer explode when triggered. You pause. You breathe. You respond instead of react. That space between emotion and action, that single breath, is proof of growth. Jung once wrote that emotional maturity begins when we stop being possessed by our feelings. You still feel deeply, but your feelings no longer control you. The unconscious no longer hijacks your behavior. You've become the observer of your own mind. Then something remarkable happens. Your pain transforms into creation. Instead of escaping it, you begin to express it. You write, you paint, you build, you help. You start turning your wounds into something meaningful. Jung called this process individuation. The moment the self begins to translate suffering into form. The darkness finds its language, and through it, you become whole. Healing, at its highest point, isn't about escaping pain. It's about giving it a purpose. You no longer waste your energy avoiding what hurts. You alchemize it. You turn chaos into art, heartbreak into insight, loneliness into strength. And from that alchemy comes peace, the kind that doesn't depend on circumstance, the kind that no one can take from you, because you finally understand that solitude isn't emptiness, it's wholeness. It's the quiet space where you meet your truest self. And once you've found that peace within, you begin to see the world differently. You notice that you're not fighting for peace anymore. You are peace. One day, you'll wake up and realize something subtle has changed. The noise that used to fill your head is quieter. The people who once drained you no longer have the same power. You move slower, but with purpose. There's a stillness underneath everything you do. And that stillness is freedom. Not the kind of freedom you can post about or prove to anyone. It's quieter than that. It's the kind of freedom that comes from no longer needing to be understood, validated, or chosen. Jung often said that most of our suffering comes from trying to live a life that doesn't belong to us. But once you start walking your own path, without apology, the tension inside you finally releases. You begin to notice peace in ordinary things, the sound of rain, the way sunlight touches the wall. You're no longer chasing the next breakthrough or the next version of yourself. You realize the version you've been becoming has already arrived, softly, without announcement. That's the paradox of real healing. You don't see it happening while you're in it. You notice it in hindsight, in the calm after the storm, in the moments you handle with grace instead of panic. The person you've become is not the same person who once begged for clarity or closure. You've outgrown the noise that once defined you. And that's when you understand the quiet truth Jung devoted his life to revealing. That freedom isn't found in escaping the self. It's found in returning to it. You finally come home.